Chapter 27. Dementor Attack. Hermione, are you coming? Neville asked, as he wrapped his red and gold scarf around his neck. At the same time Colin slipped on his heavy winter cloak. She looked up from her pile of parchment, scrunched up her nose, and shook her head. No, you guys go on. You know I'm not that interested in Quidditch unless Gryffindor is playing. I'll stay here where it's warm, she said with a laugh. You just don't understand Quidditch, Neville said with a teasing grin. But all right. I know we have a test coming up soon for potions. We'll let you study, but if you do decide to join us, Harry has made a deal with Hufflepuff to let us all sit with them today, so that's where we will all be. All right. Thanks you guys, she said with an appreciative smile. Neville and Colin were the last to leave the common room, and she watched them go before she shuffled through her stack of parchment. With one more cautious look around to make sure she was alone, she pulled out a single sheet and carefully placed it on the top. Yesterday, when the boys were preoccupied with getting that silly snake ready, she had finally managed to get the last thing she needed, which was Goldie's middle name. She had asked him what it was, and now she was finally able to, hopefully, solve a puzzle that she had had on her mind for nearly 2 weeks. Hermione sighed as she gazed at the random assortment of letters she had written down, but she decided to dismiss what she already had written, and start over. Gordycigrdroffin. Okay, now I know that Gryffindor just has to be in there, she mumbled. It's just so obvious. Gryffindor. Gryffindor, she said with a triumphant grin. But what about the other letters? I know it's an anagram. I just know it, she exclaimed to the empty room. Think, Hermione, think. Now armed with the knowledge of Gordy's middle name, she decided to write the rest of the letters out to make them clearer to her. Cigardioe. There is a name there, I just know there is, she mumbled. Her mind began whirling as she continued to stare at the letters for what seemed like a half an hour. Then it suddenly hit her like a stack of books. Godric, she breathed, as she stared at the letters with wide eyes. Godric Gryffindor. She placed her head down on the table, and shook it from side to side. That's not possible. It just can't be. Gordy can't be Godric Gryffindor. I am proud of you, you honor Gryffindor with your bravery. Gordy's words from the night before floated around in her head, and tears welled up in her eyes as all the signs suddenly came together. Harry calls him Godric as a joke, and Gordy calls Harry Salazar, she said breathlessly. I'm the heir of Gryffindor. Gordy told me about a book. You bloody Gryffindor. The Gryffindor in Slytherin robes. Welcome to Hogwarts circa 1992, where all Slytherins are the devil, and Gryffindors can do no wrong. He knows. Harry knows he's Godric Gryffindor, she said as she paced back and forth across the common room. And Harry isn't Harry Potter, he's Salazar Slytherin, she gasped, as she stopped dead in her tracks and stared up at the ceiling. That is a big leap though. I read about it in a book. I can teach you a new spell. Do you want to learn a new spell? All right, I'll teach you Parseltongue. Spare me the too young speech, headmaster, it is you who is too young to know what you are talking about. That last thought made Hermione sink into a nearby chair, and a brief moment of fear pierced her heart. He is Salazar Slytherin, she whispered, as her eyes darted around nervously. What do I do now? Hermione glanced around anxiously as she tried to figure out what to do, but then she sighed. I'm not going to do anything, she thought. There just isn't enough information for me to act on. I'll watch and wait to see if I need to tell anyone. Maybe someone already knows, she said out loud. But why, and more importantly how, are 2 of the 4 founders here? Are we in danger? Will Salazar hurt us? No, she thought immediately, as she stood up and started to pace around the room again. As she searched her memories, She realized that Salazar had only ever helped them. Like the time he helped Neville with his wand issues, and all the spells he taught them on the side. He joked with them, played pranks with them, and even let the twins prank him multiple times. He was their friend for sure, but more importantly, he was first and foremost a professor, she thought with a smile. Her thoughts also strayed to the chamber and what it all could mean. Salazar supposedly built that chamber and placed a monster in there to attack Mulborns, but she knew that wasn't true. Salazar was her and Colin's friend, and they both were Mulborns. Even the headmaster had said that the chamber and the monster was there to protect the school. And surely Godric Gryffindor wouldn't go around and let Salazar attack Mulborns, she thought. There was still a lot of things she didn't understand though. How were they able to be here? They would be over 1,000 years old by now. Why were they here? What's the real story with Harry Potter? Being a Mulborn, she didn't know much about it. She only knew what she had read. Was there something more to it? It's possible, she thought. But what about Dumbledore? She thought back to the confrontation that happened last night and began to fret. He is an unworthy Gryffindor. Unworthy? Godric Gryffindor had said that. Harry and Godric, I might as well keep calling them that. Don't seem to like the headmaster all that much. But why? She asked herself as she walked over to the window and stared out of it. There was a lot of things she didn't agree with that the headmaster had done. Like last year, what kind of educator allows dangerous animals to be locked up in a school? None that she could think of really. And what about last night? The headmaster seems to think low of children just because they are children. Your problem is that you can't see past age. Yours, or ours. Gordy had said that too. But he is right. Hermione whispered as she looked out over the grounds. Just because we are children doesn't mean that we can't be useful. We may not know everything, but we can still help in some ways. Especially if someone takes the time to teach us what we need to know. Just because we are children doesn't mean we are stupid. We just need to learn. In her heart, she knew that Gordy and Harry would never put them in danger, so she wasn't concerned about that. They cared too much about children because, after all, they had started a school. I won't do anything. I won't tell anyone what I know, she said firmly. She walked back to her piece of parchment, wadded it up, and threw it in the fireplace. Then she nodded her head firmly as she watched it burn. I will just watch. Someone has to know who they really are, and there must be a really good reason why they are doing what they are doing. There must be a really good reason why Salazar Slytherin is posing as Harry Potter, and it isn't my place to oust them. However, if I feel like someone needs to know or I feel like there is danger, I'll go to Professor McGonagall. She will know what to do, she stated, as she grabbed a poker and poked at the ashes of the parchment so that they would fall to the bottom. Then she stood up, smiled, and looked toward the window. Perhaps I'll go watch the game after all. Speaker, I can't believe you dragged me out here in this cold freezing weather. Neither Slytherin nor Gryffindor is playing today, Nora said as she coiled around his upper chest in an effort to keep warm. Why didn't you leave me inside? Because you wanted to come. I tried to tell you that you would be better off in the dorms, laying on your rock. Well, you shouldn't have listened to me then, she replied with a huff. And then you would have done nothing but complain about me leaving you behind, he said, and she hissed loudly in response, but Salazar just laughed. I do agree with you though, my dear. I don't know why they can't play Quidditch in warmer weather. Oh, shut up, Salazar, Godric whispered with chuckle. I swear, you complain more than an old bitter shrew. How dare you compare me with Petunia Dursley? He grinned. I ought to turn you into a pig. That way you'd match Vernon and Dudley. Do it, Speaker, Nora said gleefully. That way I can watch Jolly run around squealing. Godric wasn't paying attention to them now though, because he was too busy cheering at the fact that Hufflepuff had just scored a goal. He completely missed that save. "Come on Ravenclaw keeper, get it together," Blaise yelled. "I thought we said you all had to cheer for Hufflepuff only?" A grinning sixth-year Hufflepuff teased. "Yeah, that was the requirement in order for you to be able to sit with us," the third year said. "Well, my family did donate the brooms to Ravenclaw," Blaise grinned. "You can't hold it against me." "All right. I suppose." The sixth year laughed. "Come on Cedric. Go, go, go." "No. UGH. Colin shouted, at the same time Neville yelled, "That's not right." The Hufflepuff stands groaned and booed loudly because the Ravenclaw Seeker had just barreled into him and knocked him off course, which made him lose sight of the snitch. He had been so close. Godric shouted, shaking his fist at the Ravenclaw Seeker. "I call that dirty." "I agree Gordy," Neville shouted over the noise. "But it was a nice, legal, play." Blaise laughed, which caused everyone around to lightly swat him with various objects. Blaise just laughed again, and they once more focused on the game. The entire crowd was bundled up in thick heavy cloaks as they watched the two teams face off, but despite the cold, windy, and cloudy day, everyone was having a good time. The score was 80-90, and Hufflepuff was in the lead. The game had been going on for about 45 minutes already, and had been highly competitive so far. The brooms did a lot for both teams, but because of the even advantage, they only had their flying skills and athletic talent to help win the game. "Hey you lot, what's the score?" "Hermione!" Neville cried. "You decided to join us after all?" "Yeah, I think I've studied enough about the swelling solution to know it by now." Salazar turned to look at her. "Are you sure? Because if you don't add enough puffer fish eyes it could explode." She looked at him and smiled. "You tried to trick me," she exclaimed. "The recipe calls for 3 of them, but if you add any more than 4 to correct any mistakes, then it will explode." "Very good. Just keep that in mind because knowing Professor Snape, it will be on the test Monday," Salazar said with a wide grin, just as the Hufflepuff stands began booing again. "Thanks Harry, I will," she said with a thankful smile. "You're welcome," he said, then he turned to Godric. "What happened? Why are we booing?" "If you had been paying attention, you would have known that the score is now tied," he replied with a huff. "I was discussing lessons you idiot," Salazar shouted. Godric laughed and grinned. "Oh, well I suppose that is a legitimate reason." "I should hope so," Salazar said dryly, trying to unsuccessfully kick Godric in the small space. Hermione giggled as she watched them bicker back and forth. Their attitudes, conversations, and the things they said made a lot more sense now that she had figured out the truth. She knew it was going to be fun to watch the two of them from now on. Suddenly both the Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw stands were screaming loudly as both teams' Seekers shot up into the grey sky. Everyone knew they had spotted the snitch, and everyone cheered their hardest for their Seeker to get to it first. But it was not to be. The excited screams soon turned into terrified ones as 100 black-cloaked figures swooped down from the sky and into the pitch and the stands. Most of the players landed immediately and began running for shelter, but a few of them began to fall. Godric the players. Some of them fell off their brooms. Salazar shouted. "I'm on it. Expecto Patronum." A 10-foot python emerged from the end of his wand and joined the sudden appearance of a cat, a wolf, a doe, a phoenix, and several non-corporal patronesses. Across the pitch, they saw Albus helping Godric with the falling players, and Godric's large hawk patroness joined the fray as soon as those players were safely on the ground. Spells were flying every which way as the students tried in vain to keep the Dementors at bay, but most kept their heads down and covered, as the effects of the Dementors began to take hold. "Harry! The Seekers! The Seekers!" Hermione cried, grabbing a hold of his robes in panic as she pointed towards the sky. With one hand on his basilisk hide wand directing his Patronus to attack the overwhelming swarm of Dementors, he plunged his other hand into his robes and brought out the Holly and Phoenix feather wand, and managed to slow Cedric's fall with it. He may not have cared about the Holly wand before now, but he did have to agree with what Albus had said last year about having a backup. Unfortunately though, he couldn't save them both. He watched in horror as Cho Chang, the Ravenclaw Seeker, continued to fall. There was nothing more Salazar could do, but Godric saw what was happening. Nahum. A bright ball of flames appeared over the Hufflepuff stands, and Godric quickly pointed towards the falling girl. Nahum immediately vanished and reappeared above her. He caught her just in time, and they breathed a sigh of relief as he gently set Cho down. Cedric grabbed her hand and they immediately began running for shelter. Another bright ball of flames suddenly appeared in the middle of the pitch as Fawkes arrived. He joined Nahum, and the two phoenixes began circling the pitch and started to sing. This seemed to give the ones who had cast the Patronuses a recharge, and several more cats, wolves, does, and phoenix Patronuses filled the sky. Now that they didn't have any more falling players to worry about, Godric cast several more hawk Patronuses, and Salazar was able to cast a few more pythons. "What can we do?" Neville cried as he stood up and began trying to fight off the Dementors. "Just keep your head down," Salazar shouted, as he sent a python flying into a Dementor that dared to get close to the boy. "There is nothing more that can be done at the moment." "Will you teach us that spell?" Hermione asked as she pulled Neville back down. Salazar looked at the two Gryffindors and nodded slightly. "I can try," he answered. It continued on this way for several more minutes before the Dementors fled from the attacking Patronuses, but finally the sky was clear of the nasty beings and one by one the Patronuses began to disappear. All around them students were crying, and several were bleeding from the minor cuts and scrapes they had received from falling and hitting their heads. Salazar looked around and took a deep breath. "Okay you lot, listen up," he shouted, while clapping his hands to get everyone's attention. "Those of you that require medical attention, over there," he said, pointing towards one side of the stands. "Those of you who do not, please make your way back to your common room in an orderly fashion. If you have chocolate, eat some because it will help you feel better. If you have enough to share with your housemates, please do so. Now is not the time to be selfish with your candy stashes." Nearly all of them nodded numbly and began doing what Salazar had told them to, but one second-year Hufflepuff by the name of Zacharias Smith stood up and glared at him. "And who are you to tell us what to do?" he said defiantly. "You're just a stupid Slytherin and you don't belong over here anyway." "Shut up, Smith," Susan Bones snapped. "You're nothing but a bleeding coward. I saw you hiding under several first years. He saved your unworthy bum, and all that he said makes sense and is correct. Don't talk to me that way, Bones," he shouted. Then he turned, and stomped away. Susan rolled her eyes and turned to face Salazar and the others, who were glaring at Smith's retreating form. "Sorry about him. He is full of himself because he claims to be a descendant of Helga Hufflepuff, and he believes we should all fall down and worship at his feet. Most of us think he's lying or mental." Godric shot Salazar a look and snorted. "He certainly doesn't act the way Helga did. I vote both, lying and mental." Salazar just shook his head. "Possibly, but let's get you all sorted out," he said, looking Susan over with a sharp eye. "Are you all right?" She smiled at him and nodded. "Yes, I think so. I just have a small scrape on my arm, but I'll be all right. I'm going to head to my dorm. I have chocolate, and I'll be sharing it with my dorm mates." "Very good. Thank you. I'm sure Professor Sprout will be along soon, so if you need anything, make sure you speak up." "I will, thanks Harry. I saw what you and Gordy right?" she asked, and Godric nodded. "I saw what you all did, and I thank you for helping us." "It was no trouble." Gordruk said with a smile. But run along now, we need to attend to those who are hurt. You're right. Thank you again, Susan replied with a grateful smile. Then she headed off to find her friends. Salazar and Gordruk glanced around. The Hufflepuff stands were nearly empty now, and there was only the ones needing medical attention left. Gordruk went over to them, called for Nahum, and told them to grab a hold of his tail so that he could transport them to the hospital wing. Most of them stared in awe at the Phoenix, and were probably wondering why a Slytherin, of all people, would have won, but they complied and Gordruk watched as they left. Meanwhile, Salazar turned to look over Hermione, Blaise, Colin, and Neville to make sure they weren't hurt. He sighed with relief when he realized they were all right. Hermione, Colin, and Neville, you all need to find the rest of Gryffindor House and go with them. Professor McGonagall is likely taking a head count, and will no doubt worry about you if she can't find you. Blaise, head down with them and find Slytherin House. Professor Snape is likely doing the same. We will be right behind you. They all nodded and began heading off in that direction. Salazar watched them go, and took the time to look around again. The pitch was nearly empty, but there were a few stragglers that checking up on friends from other houses. However, they soon moved off and the pitch is finally empty. He turned to Gordruk, who was also watching the stragglers. We need to go. We may be needed elsewhere. This should not have happened, Salazar, he answered gravely as he stared out over the pitch. The Ministry should be held accountable for this. Hogwarts is plenty safe, and there is no need for those things to be here. I know, but let's get going, Salazar whispered as they began to head down the stairs. I don't know about you, but I could use some chocolate. I don't have any though. I don't have any either, but I can sneak off the grounds, return to my adult form, and get some from Honeydukes. Use my personal tunnel. I'll also give you some galleons when we get back to the common room. Try to get as much chocolate as you can. Slytherin House isn't likely to share. I know, Gordruk whispered sadly. They were halfway down the stairs when they ran into Professor Sprout breathlessly making her way up. Mr. Potter, Mr. Ruffin, she exclaimed. Are you two all right? Yes, Ma'am, Salazar answered. We are the last ones down. I have sent most of the students to the Hufflepuff common room, but those that needed medical attention have already been sent to the hospital wing. I hope you will forgive me for taking charge, but I told your house to remain there until you arrived. I also told them to eat some chocolate, and to share with those that don't have any. She stared at him for a few moments, but then she slowly nodded. How many were hurt? 10 were hurt badly enough to go to Madame Pomfrey, Gordruk answered. Most just had a few scrapes, but those with head wounds and more serious cuts were transported by Nahum, my Phoenix, to the hospital wing. Her eyes widened at his words. That was your Phoenix alongside Fawkes? Yes, Ma'am, he answered simply as they reached the bottom. I saw a large Snakes and Hawks defending the Hufflepuff stands. Was that you too? Yes, Salazar replied quietly. She stared at them again with wide eyes, but before she could speak, they heard someone approaching from behind. Potter. Ruffin. The three of them turned sharply to find Severus quickly making his way towards them. He looked shaken up, but otherwise seemed to be all right. Severus, Professor Sprout began, stepping in front of the two founders. Please don't be hard on them. They helped so much. It was them. The Snake and the Hawk. I don't know how they were able to cast those patronuses, but they defended my Hufflepuffs and helped them afterwards. Please, Severus, I beg you. Don't be hard on them, she asked, giving him a pleading look. Severus glanced from Professor Sprout to Salazar and Gordruk and nodded curtly. Very well, he answered. Thank you, she said with a breathless sigh. Then she turned to the children. I'll take my leave now. Mr. Potter, Mr. Ruffin, I know it's not much, but it's all I can do to show my gratitude. 30 points to the both of you. They both smiled kindly at her and nodded. It was no trouble at all, but thank you, Gordruk said. She nodded her head in acknowledgement, then hurried towards the castle. When she was out of earshot, Severus spoke. Sir, have you seen Mr. Zerbini? Yes, Blaise was with us and he is fine. We sent him to the common room. If she hasn't found them already, let Minerva know that Hermione, Colin, and Neville were with us, and they were also all right. I sent them on ahead to Gryffindor Tower. Salazar answered, and Severus nodded. What is going to be done about this situation? Gordruk asked curiously. I don't know for sure, but to be honest, I've never seen Albus so angry. As soon as the danger passed, he made sure the rest of us in the staff stands were all right, then he stormed off down the stairs. My guess is, he is going to the ministry. I don't doubt it, Salazar replied. I know he didn't want those nasty things here any more than the rest of us did. I agree. I'm heading to Honeydukes to get some chocolate. The Fidelius charm on my house negates the anti-apparition and disapparition jinxes on the grounds. I'll just depart from there. I don't want to get near those dementors, and your personal tunnel runs right into them at the front gate. What about the galleons I need to give you? Salazar, don't worry about that. I have the money. It's fine. Gordruk replied, as he began heading into the forest. They watched him go, but then Salazar sighed heavily and turned to Severus. How many were hurt? Several from Ravenclaw and 2 from Slytherin were almost kissed, but they will be fine. Over 20 students were hurt badly and were sent to Poppy. All right, she may need some help. I'll keep an eye on Slytherin House, but I need you to go and see what you can do to help her. In fact, do you know the potion that we were working on over the summer? The one that is the equivalent to Phoenix Tears? Severus asked with a hint of excitement in his voice. Yes. Please go to my flat and get it. It could be of use here, if Nehum and Fawkes aren't already helping. Use Gordruk's home to get off the grounds. I know he won't mind if you do. Yes, sir. What of letting Minerva know about Granger, Longbottom, and Creevy? Severus asked. I'll let her know, if she doesn't already. Salazar answered. Severus nodded, and then he too headed into the forest towards Gordruk's house. Salazar sighed, bowed his head against the cold, bitter wind, and began heading up the long path towards the castle. He did see Minerva at the front doors when he got there, but thankfully Hermione had already found her. When Salazar finally arrived in the Slytherin common room though, he was thoroughly disgusted by what he saw. Several of the older students were hogging their own chocolate, and not sharing with the younger children who didn't have any. Draco and company were downing chocolate frog after chocolate frog, and were barely taking a break to breathe. Salazar knew the effects of the Dementors were bad. He was feeling them himself, but this was downright shameful. Harry, there you are, Blaise said quietly, coming up behind him. Are you all right? Physically yes, but... Blaise trailed off and shook his head. I know. Just sit down. Salazar whispered. Gordy has snuck off the grounds and has gone to Honeydukes in Hogsmeade for some chocolate. He will. Give it back, Flint. Someone suddenly shouted. Salazar looked up to see Marcus Flint snatching a few bars of chocolate out of the hands of some of the known neutral Slytherins. He drew his wand, and nearly stomped over to the boy. You heard them, Flint. Give it back. He said in a low, dangerous voice. He was not in the mood to play nice right now. Marcus turned to look at him and started laughing. Potter, your little guard dog isn't here to save your skin. What did he do, fall prey to the Dementors? I suggest you mind your own business. That is theirs, you need to back off. You know, Potter, Flint said, tossing the chocolate bars back at the neutral Slytherins. I don't know how you ended up in Slytherin. You don't even act like one. Your emotions show plainly on your face, and it is perfectly clear where you stand. You should try a little more subtlety. And you and your little buddy Montague, who I know is standing behind me, need to try a little more common sense. You do not want to irritate me right now." Flint narrowed his eyes. "You're not a Slytherin, Potter, and you are fixing to be very sorry for getting sorted into this house," he said dangerously. "Now." Salazar instantly dropped to the floor, which caused whatever spell Flint and the Montague had cast to hit each other. They cried out in pain and fell on their bums, but Salazar rolled over onto his knees, stood up, and immediately transfigured both boys into very ornate-looking dark wooden chairs, with red and gold color padding for the seats and back. Blaise started laughing and levitated one of the chairs over to the fireplace and sat down in it. Salazar glared at the two chairs and also levitated the other one to the fireplace, but he didn't sit down. Instead, he looked around with a scowl on his face. "Pigs, the lot of you. Oh, how Slytherin House has fallen. Most of you are a disgrace." He spat. "To those who are sharing, I thank you. To those who are not, shame on you and your selfishness." "Are we redecorating?" an amused voice asked from the common room door. Salazar didn't need to turn around to know who it belonged to. He just continued to glare at the pigs that were clearly on display. "I'm thinking about it. Did you get enough?" "Yeah, after I explained what happened to the owners, I bought all of what Honeydukes had. They even threw some chocolate in for free. I've already been by the hospital wing to drop some off in case Madame Pomfrey needed it. She said Ravenclaw was bad off, and that she and Flitwick would be passing it all out to them soon." "All right," Salazar said. "How many Slytherins are in the hospital wing?" "Only the two who were almost kissed. Adrian Pusey and Pansy Parkinson, though they were being nasty to Madame Pomfrey and were trying to demand her full attention. I did her a favor and stunned them before I left." "Godric, how could you do that? They were almost kissed," he shouted. "I don't care," he shot back. "Those nasty, arrogant, pompous asses weren't even displaying signs of it like the others. It looked to me like they just said that to get some attention. You and I both know the signs, and they were not showing any." Salazar sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose. "I'm sorry. Perhaps you're right, and honestly, I wouldn't put it past those two to do something like that. I know I'm hot-headed, Salazar, but I'd hope you'd give me a little more credit than that," Godric replied gruffly. He looked at his friend apologetically and nodded. "I'm sorry. It's just the Dementor's effects are getting to us both right now. Don't apologize. It's fine," Godric said, taking a deep breath as he leaned against a table. "Here, eat this," he continued, placing a chocolate frog into Salazar's hand. "Nice chairs, by the way." Salazar passed the chocolate frog off to a nearby first year who still looked shaken up, and chuckled a bit. "Yeah, I call them Flint and the Montague. And they are very comfortable," Blaise added, as he began to help the two founders pass out chocolate frogs and bars to those who needed it. Some in the house, including Blaise, watched them carefully though. Blaise knew that they called each other Salazar and Godric as a joke, but this time didn't seem like a joke, and he began to wonder if there was more to everything than what meets the eye. Draco and company narrowed their eyes at Blaise, Salazar, and Godric, and Salazar didn't need to use legilimency to know what they were thinking. They eyed all the chocolate that Godric had dumped out on the table, and he knew that Severus would be hearing about Godric's little foray off of the grounds. He just couldn't help but chuckle. When they made sure everyone that needed the chocolate had it, they sat down in the new chairs. Salazar had no intentions of leaving the two fifth years that way for very long, just long enough to give pause to those who dared to cross him. He was tired of the abuse that was constantly being thrown his way, and he was not going to put up with it anymore. Flint and Montague were not in any pain, but as he and Blaise took their new seats, those that were in the common room glanced in their direction with a mixture of fear and loathing from those who were not so friendly, and gratitude from those that were. Blaise continued to watch Salazar and Godric closely though, and the tension that was between them moments ago started to vanish as they sat and ate their chocolate frogs. It completely broke, however, when Blaze looked down at the recent frog he had just opened. "Here, Gordy. I think you should have this card. He does seem to be your hero after all." Godric gave him a quizzical look and took it from him. Then he began to laugh loudly. "Godric Gryffindor," he said simply. "Really?" Salazar asked with excitement, and Godric passed the card off to him. "You know, it is my duty as a true Slytherin to give this card the treatment it deserves," he said with a playful grin as he took a quill out of his pocket. They watched as he made a few scribble marks, and then he held it up with a snort. Godric's image was now scowling at them because of the defacement, and the fact that Salazar had drawn devil's horns above him. Godric began laughing loudly again and took the card and quill from him. He made a few scribble marks of his own, then held it up to reveal the pitchfork that he had drawn. Blaze took it from with a grin, made his own scribble marks, and placed it on the table to reveal the tail he had drawn. Godric's image was scowling worse than ever now, and he shook his tiny little fist at them. This only made the three of them laugh even more, but Blaze caught something in the image that made him pause, and he stared at it. "What is it, Blaze?" Godric asked, as he caught the look on the young lad's face. "What?" "Oh, nothing," he replied, glancing at Godric. It just looked like he laughed for a moment. "It was rather odd, but I think it's my mind playing tricks on me." "You're tired," Salazar commented. Blaze sighed and rubbed his head. "Yeah, I think so. Do you think I could take an hour's nap without waking up to find the common room in shambles because of the two of you?" he asked with a small chuckle. "I think so," Salazar answered with an amused twinkle in his eye. "You go on and get some sleep. We will be fine." Blaze nodded, picked up the card with a grin, and headed for the dorms. When he got to his bed, he lay down with a tired sigh and looked at the still scowling image. He lied about it, laughing of course, but there was something in the image's eyes that had made him pause. If he pictured the image without the red beard and long hair, the image would look just like an older version of Gordy. He had seen the same exact scowl on Gordy's face before. In fact, he had seen it just last night, and the day that Draco called Hermione Mudblood and was bragging about his broom. Blaze didn't know what to think about this new situation, and as he fell asleep, he decided that he would take his thoughts to Hermione and get her opinion on them. Despite what had happened that morning, Neville didn't feel like sitting still in the common room and decided to wander about the castle in order to clear his head. Colin had decided to take his mind off things by developing rolls of film from the last few weeks. Hermione was currently curled up in an armchair by the fireplace reading, and Fred and George were busy trying to lighten the mood of everyone in Gryffindor Tower by playing pranks on each other. Neville just didn't feel like sharing in their laughter at the moment. He had a lot of things on his mind, and most notably, the confrontation with Dumbledore the night before. He was angry with the headmaster for his remarks last night. How could the man stand in front of him and plead for the life of someone like Bellatrix Lestrange? He didn't have the answer to that question, but he liked what Harry had to say on the matter. Neville didn't know if he had it in his heart to take a life. He was only 12 after all, but he knew that if he ever came face to face with Bellatrix that he would have a few things to say. He also knew that he'd probably find himself at the end of her one for doing it. Neville didn't care though. His Gram had been straightforward when he had asked for the details about what had happened to his parents. He had only been 7 at the time, but even as shy as he was back then, he made a vow to at least look Bellatrix in the eyes and tell her exactly what he thought of her. That's all he wanted really. Harry was a fighter, and Neville desperately wanted to be a fighter too. He knew that if he stuck with Harry that he may possibly get the chance he was hoping for, and if he listened to Albus Dumbledore he would not. Neville knew, even if she didn't speak it out loud, that his Gram blamed the headmaster for his parents' condition, and it was for that reason his Gram had a very low opinion of the man. Neville himself had always held off judging him, But after last night, he agreed with his gram and decided to write her and let her know exactly what had taken place the night before. With that decision firmly in his mind, he changed directions and began the long trek back to the common room. Albus sighed wearily as he looked around at the staff that had gathered in the staff lounge. It was late in the evening, just before curfew, and he had called this meeting to discuss his conversation with the minister earlier that day. Which, unfortunately, wasn't much. Before we get started on the real reason we are here, Poppy, may I inquire about those still in the hospital wing? Of course, Albus. She replied with a nod. Severus has been a major help for me today. Calming drafts were flying off the shelf and chocolate was being devoured at a steady rate. Severus was able to help me by attending to those needs, while I concentrated on the more serious things. Those who were nearly kissed are recovering at an excellent rate, and should be released tomorrow. Other than them, no one else warranted a stay in the wing. Very good. I'm glad to hear that. Severus, thank you for helping. Albus said tiredly, and Severus nodded in acknowledgement. Also, during the attack there were two patronesses that I didn't recognize. A snake and a hawk. Does anyone have any idea where they came from? Severus, Remus, Poppy, and Minerva glanced nervously at one another, while everyone else shook their head. However, Professor Sprout looked at Albus and nodded. I do, Headmaster. She stated softly. It was Mr. Potter and Mr. Ruffin. From my vantage point I could see those patronesses were protecting my Hufflepuffs. When the attack was over, I quickly made my way over to the stands and came upon Mr. Potter and Mr. Ruffin making their way down. They told me it was them, and I also learned that the other phoenix that showed up belongs to Mr. Ruffin. His name is Nahum. Mr. Ruffin used his phoenix to transport the Hufflepuffs that were hurt to Poppy. 10 students did arrive by phoenix. That phoenix also willingly gave up tears to help with the more serious that were wounded. Poppy added. Severus did help with that as well. He provided a potion that is the equivalent to phoenix tears. That is why no one but those who were almost kissed are still under observation. Interesting. Albus mumbled with a nod in Severus's direction, but then his gaze traveled to the ceiling as he got lost in his own thoughts. Albus, how can 2 second years produce full corporal patronesses, and multiple ones at that? Flitwick asked in surprise. I don't know, Phileas. Albus said, shaking his head, but then he turned to Professor Sprout. Pomona, did you get any inclination that Harry and Mr. Ruffin were lying? Minerva's eyes became hard and cold, and Severus's jaw stiffened. Remus had to catch himself and force the growl that he was about to let out, and Poppy took several deep breaths and clenched her fists together. No, Albus. In fact, I verified the story with my Hufflepuffs. It was all the same. Mr. Potter and Mr. Ruffin cast the charm. It was them. My Hufflepuffs that were hurt confirmed that Mr. Ruffin called for his phoenix. They weren't lying, she said, and told the story about what Salazar did in the aftermath of the attack. What's the matter, Albus? Minerva began in a snippy tone. Are you upset that a Slytherin has a phoenix bonded to him, or are you upset because Mr. Potter acted like an adult? Remus covered a snort with a cough. Poppy smirked. Severus bowed his head and hid a grin behind his coffee cup, but Albus glared at her. Minerva didn't care and glared back at him. She was tired, and all she wanted to do right now was to go to bed and forget this day had happened. She did not have the patience to listen to yet another Harry-bashing session. Is the phoenix truly bonded to Mr. Ruffin, or is the phoenix under some kind of spell? He asked in a simple matter-of-fact tone. Now you're grasping at straws, Albus. Minerva said hotly as she stood up to leave. You know, as well as anyone, that phoenixes can't be tricked in any way whatsoever. I'm leaving. Poppy, will you be a dear and fill me in tomorrow? Of course, Minerva. Poppy said, even though the Mediwitch looked like she wanted to follow the deputy headmistress out the door. Albus watched her stomp out of the room and slammed the door. Then he sighed and looked at the remaining staff and shook his head. Cornelius has once again shut down my proposal to have the Dementors removed, even after today's attack. I felt sure that this would have made him bow to the pressure, but it has not. Now we must take drastic measures. What are you proposing? Remus asked, as he leaned back in his chair. I'm afraid we may have to go about this the Slytherin way, Albus said with a sigh. That caught Severus's attention and he looked at Albus with a raised eyebrow. Severus, I need you to begin encouraging your Slytherins to write home to their parents. Mention to them that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one. The one in this case being Harry. There is no reason for the Dementors to be here just because one boy might be in danger. I understand, Headmaster. Once I get the Poulards stirred up over this, the Ministry will back down from the pressure. I can't see the Minister saying no to the Malfoys. Neither can I now. This does not mean that I don't care about Harry. I do, but Hogwarts is plenty safe enough, and I don't think we have to worry about Sirius Black coming here to kill anyone. Albus said. I agree with you, Albus. Remus added. If Sirius were to come here, I'm sure that we all can capture him quickly. He is just one man. Indeed. Albus said with a nod. Filius, Pomona, I'd also like you to encourage your houses to do the same. Have them write home. These things can't be allowed to stay here. After what happened today, no one wanted to argue that point. The Dementors were an added security measure, but the risk of having them here was just too great. Severus and Remus both glanced at each other. They knew this would be a good news to Salazar and Godric. However, this did prove to be a slight problem, considering that there was a certain rat that was just waiting for the opportunity to run. Time was growing short for Peter Pettigrew.
Hey guys, what's going on? Thank you so much for watching today's episode. If you guys want to watch more like it, please subscribe to my channel and become part of the video game fanfiction plot. And please leave a comment down below and hit that like button. If you guys have any suggestions on any stories you guys want me to read, don't hesitate. They're always welcome here in the video game fanfic plot. That also goes for video games. Until next time, goodbye!